Maintenant, on va passer au deuxième volet de la conférence. On va passer à BenDeniston, qui est membre de l'équipe scientifique du Larouche PAC. Pour la traduction, si vous avez besoin de traduction en français, c'est toujours le même numéro, le bon numéro maintenant qu'on a, donc juste appeler avec votre téléphone, si besoin est. Sinon, c'est ça. Ben va parler en anglais. Donc, on est en train de... On a de la liaison. Is it connected at all? Yeah. OK. Ce ne sera pas très long. Ah, le voici. D'accord. Here he is. So Ben, whenever you are ready.
Okay. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Je vais couper la lumière.
So I'm a member of Lyndon LaRouche's scientific research team, sometimes referred to as the basement team. And I was asked to talk today a little bit about the work we're doing, the work that Lyndon LaRouche has had us doing on the issue of understanding the significance of our galaxy, of the Milky Way galactic system that we're a part of. And this is kind of a frontier area of research that we've been pursuing under Mr. LaRouche's direction. But to get into it, I want to just emphasize the way we're approaching it. The importance of this issue is not an abstract academic scientific study. It's a pursuit of the next scientific level for mankind as a unique species on this planet. You know, the issue is not simply the galaxy as some abstract object, but what the galaxy means, what the principle of our galactic system means for mankind. Not as some isolated object, but what does it mean for mankind, and what is it then, and what does that process then tell us about the nature of mankind as a unique force on this planet, in this solar system, and beyond? And that's what we've been working on with our scientific work with Mr. LaRouche. That's what I wanted to discuss a little bit today. I want to situate it within the context of this threat of thermonuclear war that we've been discussing, that was referenced earlier by Jacques in his opening remarks, that we are literally sitting on the verge of thermonuclear annihilation. If we let Obama go to war with Russia, with China, utilizing thermonuclear weapons, we can see the extinction of modern civilization. And I want to just take a minute and look at that fact, because I think it's a very significant point to be brought out in that reality, on the one side, in the horrors of the potential we see in the hands of Obama with the threat of nuclear war. And I just wanted to take a minute and look at what we're talking about when we talk about the power of thermonuclear weapons. I'm not sure how familiar people are with thermonuclear explosives, but you often measure the size of a nuclear explosive or a thermonuclear explosive in maybe kilotons or megatons. Now, what does that mean? Kilotons references thousands of tons of TNT equivalent. So TNT is a standard explosive that we're familiar with. If we want to measure the energy released from a nuclear bomb, a nuclear explosive device, oftentimes it's compared to the equivalent amount of TNT which would be required to release the same amount of energy as one nuclear explosive. So these are often measured in terms of kilotons, which kilo meaning thousand, thousands of tons, or if not kilotons, megatons, millions of tons of weight of TNT to match the energy release of a single thermonuclear explosive device. One megaton device, and that's by no means the largest thermonuclear explosive or weapon that's been developed or is capable of being deployed, but just to take a reference point, one megaton device releases the same amount of energy as 1 million tons of TNT. To visualize how much TNT that is, that's enough TNT explosive material to fill 2 entire oil supertankers. And if you've seen how large an oil supertanker is, you have an idea of what I'm talking about. So just to kind of take a second to stretch or to expand our imagination a little bit, the equivalent of 2 entire oil supertankers filled with TNT, that much energy can be released in one single thermonuclear explosive device. And that's not all devices are of that size, but that's just to give a range and a conception of how much energy can be released by one of these devices. You know, we're talking one device can devastate an entire city. Now, the United States and Russia each have something on the order of 10,000 of these devices. The United States has submarines. We've covered in particular the Ohio-class submarines of the United States military forces, where each submarine can have up to 24 missiles, and each missile can have 4 to 8 individual warheads, which can be targeted at different targets. So any one U.S. submarine can release something on the order of 100 to 200 warheads coming out of something around the range of potentially 24 missiles. So we live in a pretty wild, frightening situation where one submarine out of 14 of this class that are known about can release something in the order of 1 to 200 devices, warheads, each significantly, 1 or 2 orders of magnitude, or 10 or 20 times more powerful than the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this is an incredible, frightening capability that exists. One submarine can potentially wipe out well over 100 cities with one series of launches of their missiles. And we have 14 of these submarines. And then we have the capabilities of the Air Force, of our bombers. And as Jacques referenced, some of these new fighter jets outfitted with new nuclear bombs that extend the range and the speed at which these can be deployed. We have, ground-based launch missiles, silos. So it is a capability, as Jacques referenced back to the time of Kennedy, it's been recognized and increasingly recognized by sane people that this is a new form of warfare. This is a new form of conflict. This is a different game, a different stage, a different age that mankind has entered within the past, 80, 50 to 80 years. And right now, that capability is in the hands of Obama. So, just to re-reference what we've discussed, Obama is not mentally fit to be in the presidency of the United States, and LaRouche is leading the effort to have him removed from office because he is pursuing a military aggression policy directed at China and Russia, backed up by this thermonuclear annihilation capability. But let's think about this reality that warfare has now reached the point where we can destroy ourselves as a species. That has not been the case before. We've had world wars. We've had the collapse of empires. We've had conflicts. None of that has had the ability to self-annihilate the entire human species. Now that potentiality exists. So this is a unique, although we've been in this point for decades now, it's still a new situation. It's still a new reality that global society has not come to really address in a sane way. Something has to change. We can no longer afford the potential, even the slightest chance, for this type of conflict to break out, because the consequences are beyond anything that we could even imagine. But right now we're again, after having gone through the Cuban Missile Crisis, after having gone through the Cold War, the high points in the Cold War in the 80s, having gone through these developments, having gone through cases where just a glitch in a computer system has almost triggered launches. That has happened before. Having gone through these periods, we're again at a point where we do have the real life potential for a frankly mentally unfit person in office, Barack Obama, pursuing a geopolitical policy, pursuing the types of policies that have, plagued the world in the past centuries, of this imperial domination, geopolitical domination. A new form of that same mode of action is now again bringing us to the point where the reality is on the table that we could actually eliminate ourselves as a species. So something has to change. Now, there's been movements in the United States and other places that take the approach of saying, well, we need to just get rid of nuclear technology. We need to eliminate nuclear weapons. Well, that might not be a bad thing if we could actually somehow get to the point where we don't have massive stockpiles and, launch-ready nuclear weapons sitting there on cue pointed at each other. That would be good. But that wouldn't, prevent some other nation or some other force at some point in the future from developing that technology again, developing the capabilities again. So some people say we should just eliminate this technology. We should just not have anything to do with nuclear at all. Some people go completely over the top and say we should just get rid of all things nuclear, not even, pretend we never even discovered this this power, this capability of nuclear reactions, which can unleash such devastation. But that is a fallacious, some just frankly idiotic view, because you can't undo technological progress. You can't undo scientific discoveries. You can't take mankind backwards. You can't reverse mankind's development, and you can't hold mankind back at any one given level. So I think, looking at this looking at the current war danger from that standpoint, I think puts a rather interesting and important perspective on what challenges we are facing right now. we being, mankind as a whole, and we being, in particular, people who are stepping up to take leadership to move society forward and to address these particular challenges. We're at a point where something does have to change. We can't somehow create a world where mankind no longer knows about E equals mc squared and the potential for releasing the energy density capabilities in the atomic nucleus. We're in that world now. You can't take that back. But what we're discussing here, what Lyndon LaRouche has put on the table, what he's been fighting for decades, what Helga Zepp LaRouche has been fighting for decades, what Helga Zepp LaRouche has more recently put on the table as an explicit call for the end of the age of geopolitics. We're looking at the need to make a change, not in eliminating some technology, but in moving the global cultural system to a new level, to a new stage. And this is not, think about the threat we're facing right now. This is not some, fantasy, fantastic vision where, we just want to, everybody's going to get along and everything's going to be perfect. And, this is not just some fantasy. This is a necessity now. Mankind has reached the point where we have to move to a new level of understanding of what the true nature of the human species is, as a uniquely creative force different than any animal species that's reached a level of development, of progress, where if we continue to follow these old paradigms, to allow these types of geopolitical or imperial or oligarchical modes of activity continue, that we're threatening to wipe ourselves out. So the idea of moving to a new age beyond general warfare, where nations actually cooperate in common aims, in common progress, in common development. We actually find ground that we all share. Americans, Canadians, Europeans, the Chinese, Russians, find grounds that we all share as human beings that we can collaborate on in common pursuits that will benefit all of the people involved in that. We're now at the point where that type of shift is not just some idealistic fantasy that some people might want to talk about. That is a necessity now, typified by what Obama represents. Because if we don't do that, we're going to continue to have people like Obama. We're going to continue to have the threats of warfare. And one of these is going to break out, and that's going to be it. So now we're at the point where we have to make that shift. Now, included in that shift is a higher recognition of what mankind really is as a creative force. Because with this whole geopolitical perspective that needs to be eliminated, comes with these doctrines of the belief in a zero-sum game. The idea that there's a zero sum, that there's everything, no matter what, will come out to the same finite level of wealth, of resources. That there's a finite level of wealth available on this planet. There's a finite amount of resources available on this planet. And if we let an adversary get some of those resources, that means it's that many fewer resources for us. This is the idea of a zero-sum game, this geopolitical perspective, that we must compete and suppress our enemies and try and dominate our enemies so we can ensure our own progress and dominance. This idea that mankind is a species of that nature must go, because that's not true. I think this idea of a zero-sum game, finite wealth, finite resource supplies. I think this is not only typified in the geopolitical perspective, but it's also typified by the Green Movement most explicitly. This is the entire doctrine of the Green Movement. The Green Movement is built on the same false ideologies, false assumptions, false beliefs as these geopolitical thinkers, these geopolitics who are bringing us to the threat of extinction and annihilation. They share the same false worldview, the same false, not worldview, same false view of mankind, of what mankind is, the same lack of understanding of human creativity, of the very fundamental thing that separates mankind from the animals, from the beasts, from the animal species. And we're seeing this emerge, as was discussed a little bit earlier, around this new United Nations Climate Change Summit scheduled for this winter in Paris. We're seeing this in the process of the build-up to that UN Climate Change Summit, with the recent dramatic reversal of the Vatican and the Pope, with the Pope throwing his weight behind much of these ideological views of the Green Movement. Much of these views of mankind as really no different than the animal species. So, these are some of the most important issues that mankind has to take up right now. A higher scientific conception, scientific understanding of the true nature of mankind, and that which separates mankind from other forms of animal life on this planet. And then how can we, as distinct nations and distinct cultures and different peoples, come together and pursue these common grounds, these common aims? So if you take the Green Movement, you take, let's take a leading example. Take what the Pope recently did with this encyclical he wrote, this document the Pope recently put out declaring his support for many of the aspects of the Green Program, and has been part of the process of the Pope going along with this push around this UN Climate Change Summit in Paris. Well, on the one side, we know that the major force in this thing, in shifting the Pope's position, in authoring this particular document, is an official of the British Empire. He's of German origin, but he has been brought in to the British merit system. He's been officially brought in as a designated official of the British Empire by the Queen herself, a guy named by the name of John Schellenhuber. He in particular, has been on record calling for major global depopulation. He's proponent of these radical green ideas. He was the main force in shifting the position of the Pope, the position of the Vatican, to go along with this green perspective. You look at what came out in this document. You look at what came out in this new encyclical under the name of the Pope. And you look at these references to this praise of Gaia, this praise of Mother Earth, this particular praise of Mother Earth, Gaia Earth, as that which provides all the fruits and the bounties for mankind. This idea, this cult worship of the earth as the provider of all the needs for mankind, that we need to respect and pray to our Mother Earth, because Mother Earth is that which provides all of our needs. Provides us with the air, with the atmosphere, with the land, with the food that we depend upon. You know, this pagan worship of Mother Earth as the provider of all, the thing that gives us everything we need to survive. You know, there's nothing wrong with being a good caretaker. There's nothing wrong with taking care of the planet. But this idea that we praise the planet as the source of wealth for mankind is crazy, is scientifically wrong. You know, mankind does not live off of the fruits of the planet. Mankind lives off of the fruits of mankind's creative action. If mankind were an animal, mankind would be living off of the fruits of the planet, the fruits of the biosphere. If mankind were an animal, mankind would be dependent upon what is provided to our species by the biosphere itself. But we're way beyond that. We don't depend upon the natural state of the biosphere. We don't depend upon the natural conditions provided to us by Mother Earth, so-called. We are dependent upon, we live upon the creative actions generated by mankind himself. You know, if you want to, we could spend a lot of time discussing this, going through examples. I read an article recently, just a short thing, looking at agriculture and what mankind has done to increase the productivity, the usefulness of food. You know, you ask a common person today, they might think of, you know, crops, agriculture, food as something naturally provided to us by the biosphere. Nothing you eat is a natural product of the biosphere. Even if you get something that says GMO-free, genetically modified, non-genetically modified organism, that is not a natural product of the biosphere. That is a product of hundreds and thousands of years of human cultivation to increase the productiveness, the usefulness of different agricultural crops. And I think just some of these examples are fun, are useful, just to kind of get a sense. You take corn. You take what corn, corn, a major staple of the food supply for many people. You take the natural form of corn, which is not what you see in the crops today. The natural state of corn, before mankind selectively bred and altered and expanded the nutrient supply provided by one ear of corn, that the natural state of corn was 1,000 times smaller than a standard ear of corn today. 1,000 times smaller. It had maybe 5 to 10 kernels on it. It looked more like a large piece of wheat than the type of ear of corn you see today. That was natural corn. What we eat today has been improved by human intervention, by human creative development, by the unique actions of mankind in improving the conditions of the biosphere, in improving the nutrient supply, the capabilities provided by living processes. And it's not just corn. Every vegetable, fruit that you eat has been altered in a similar way. We're able to, and this is even before, this is before even the so-called modern age, before the Industrial Revolution, before fertilizer. Even well before all these developments, mankind had already for thousands of years been altering and improving the conditions of the biosphere, improving the conditions of the planet, such that mankind was increasing his living standard. increasing the amount of total wealth available to human society, increasing the total amount of net resources available to human society by uniquely human creative actions. So, you know, this idea that this assumption, this axiom that we still find today so prevalent, that we're, you know, dependent upon the conditions of the natural world and a certain finite amount of resources available in the natural world, is just scientifically absurd. But it's not just absurd, it's not just wrong, it's a very specific, particular rejection and lack of understanding of what mankind is as a unique creative species with this particular characteristic of human creativity, which separates mankind from the animals. That for mankind, what's truly human, what's truly unique about human capabilities is the ability to have this type of progress, to effectively facilitate the self-evolution of the human species in a way that no animal species can possibly do. You know, Mr. LaRouche has kind of put a certain metric to this in his scientific study of economics and his development of the scientific metric of potential relative population density. You know, maybe if you want to try and take a simplified understanding of that, you know, what you might call in effect the carrying capacity for the human species, for maybe a particular nation or a particular region or the whole planet, whatever region you want to select. You know, what's the maximum carrying capacity or potential carrying capacity? Or as Mr. LaRouche defined it in a more scientific way, in a more rigorous way, what's the maximum potential relative population density that mankind can sustain? Again, in an economy, a particular economy, in a continent, or in the world as a whole. That mankind is the only species that can act to self-define that metric, to increase that metric. You know, animal life might change and develop, but it comes with evolutionary change. It comes with the extinctions of thousands of species to make room for new species, which are of a higher order. But for animal life, these types of changes come with extinctions, come with wipeouts of entire species, and replacements of earlier species with newer species. And it comes with biological changes, morphological changes, going from cold-blooded to warm-blooded, going from skin that's you know, moist and permeable to moisture, to dry skin that can contain moisture. You know, these types of evolutionary technologies that enabled life to expand, to develop. You know, life goes through certain types of, animal life goes through certain types of qualitative progress. But it's over evolutionary time, and it's a particular type of biological process, biological evolution. But as soon as we see the introduction of mankind, we see something unique, something new that we didn't see expressed anywhere in the history of animal life. The ability for mankind to increase his potential relative population density, to change his own ecological limitations, boundaries, uniquely by actions which we can only attribute to the capabilities of the human mind specifically, human creative capabilities. So this is what it means to be human. This is what makes mankind different than the animals, this ability for this willful self-evolution of mankind. This is something that any moral and healthy society is going to be pursuing, is going to be engaged in, where every individual is in some way engaged in this process of pursuing this particular type of creative development, this particular type of creative progress for society. Moving society as a whole to a fundamentally higher level than it existed before. Creating new resource bases, creating new wealth, creating new resources that weren't available earlier, creating a higher population with higher living standards than existed before. Again, things that can only be created by the creative actions of human beings, human individuals participating in society. That type of progress, continual development in that direction, specifically focused on these unique human capabilities that separate mankind from the animals. That is the basis, that is the only basis for the future existence and development of mankind. Mankind is not defined by any particular level of progress, not any particular stage of progress, not any particular technologies. What defines mankind is not any given set of technologies. It's not fossil fuels, it's not nuclear power per se, it's not computers per se. Those are all expressions of uniquely human technological development. Those are expressions of the unique capabilities of mankind. But they're artifacts of it, they're shadows, they're effects. It's not the substance. The substance of what makes mankind unique is the ability to always create a new level, to always be able to create a new breakthrough beyond what we had before. That is what makes us unique. That's what makes us human. So as soon as you adopt the green ideology and say we're going to stop progress, stop population growth, stop development, and if you're one of these more extreme, real degenerates, real genocidalists like Prince Philip, like the Queen of England, they want to reduce the world population down to something like 1 to 2 billion people. The biggest genocide mankind has ever even conceived of. As soon as you do that, even if you're not accepting this radical genocide program of Prince Philip, even the idea of limiting development at the current state is anti-human. You're rejecting what makes mankind unique. You're denying the youth, the coming generations, of their right to exercise their human creative potential. You're denying them their ability to actualize their truly human faculties, to participate in a process of creating a new higher level future. So the fundamental fallacy of the green movement, rooted in this fallacious misunderstanding or lack of understanding of what mankind truly is as a unique creative species, has to go. It has to be removed as much as this geopolitical view which is threatening thermonuclear war. That there's a certain kind of root of these, you might think, separate ideologies, which is very similar, which comes down to the same fundamentals. Certain beliefs in finite resources, finite wealth supplies, and these types of conceptions which you would only believe and you'd only accept if you thought that mankind was just some kind of slightly more intelligent animal species. These ideas which you would only accept if you didn't understand or you rejected the truly creative nature of mankind. So on the deeper level, that's the fight we're engaged in. That's the fight that really matters right now, is moving society, moving nations to a basis of interaction which is premised upon this recognition of what universally makes mankind unique, what makes mankind different than the animal species. And this is reflected, the potential for this is reflected very clearly in what the BRICS nations are doing, very explicitly in what the leader of China has said. His policy is win-win cooperation. That's it. That is a clear understanding, a clear reflection, a clear realization that we need to move to this higher recognition that progress, creative, technological, scientific progress fundamentally transforms human society to a higher level where everybody has the potential to benefit from this new level of society created. That's the mode of society that we have to move towards. We can remove Obama, hopefully, but even if we did and didn't address this deeper issue, when would we be back in the exact same position? How long would it take? As I said earlier, we went through the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world was on the brink. Over 50 years ago. We had similar situations, maybe not as dramatic, maybe not as publicly known, but we had similar situations where we were on the verge of this type of warfare breaking out, potentially threatening the annihilation of mankind. So we've been there before. Now we're there again. Why? Because we're not addressing this root issue. This fundamental need to move to a higher order of relations that is premised upon this understanding and this acceptance of human creativity as the universal principle which makes mankind distinct and is the basis, the only basis, the fundamental natural law underlying our relations between each other as nations. And what we're seeing now with this threat of nuclear confrontation is a certain irony, a certain ironical expression of the actuality of human nature progressing to a point where now we wield, because of our unique creative capabilities, we've reached a point where we wield the principles of stars, in a sense. We wield the capability that fuels our entire solar system. That we're tapping into the principles underlying the formation and the development and the existence of entire stellar planetary systems. That I think in a very real fundamental sense, mankind is at this level is really separating himself from an existence on Earth to really premising his existence on the principle of the solar system as a whole. That because we're a creative species, naturally pursuing our creative development, improving the biosphere, improving the Earth, and now reaching a point where we're transcending even the Earth and subsuming the Earth in a sense, in terms of principle, in terms of the principles on which human society is now increasingly based. That we're basing our actions, our existence, on these higher order principles of the solar system, expressed in things like fusion technologies and the potential of matter-energy reactions. That as we pursued these capabilities and brought us to this level, there's a certain fundamental irony that we now face such horrors. But again, the horrors aren't the horrors of nuclear annihilation. The horrors aren't because of the technology. They're not because of progress. They're because we haven't yet rooted out and eliminated these false ideas, these false conceptions of the true nature of mankind and the true scientific basis for mankind's existence in pursuing our higher order development of not just the planet but out into the solar system. That what we're seeing expressed now is a natural consequence of the reality of human development on one side, interacting with the failure to remove and root out these oligarchical imperial conceptions and social tendencies which should have been gone long ago, which are the remnants of an earlier era. So if you look at mankind's current situation today, where we stand, what we're facing, that's the bigger picture. That's the fight we're engaged in. To remove, not just remove Obama, but remove the entire social process, the entire degeneracy surrounding him that's holding mankind back. And at that point, just to come to what we're working on right now under LaRouche's direction with this galactic perspective, we again see that the potentials are limitless if we pursue this direction. The solar system isn't even the limit. We're not bounded to the solar system. We can go to a higher level. The solar system is just a subsumed part, a relatively tiny part of our galaxy, composed of hundreds of billions of stars, of which our star, our sun, is only one part. Organize an entire larger coherent system, a galactic system organized by principles which we don't yet understand, which are anomalous to us presently, which we can't fully understand at our current levels. But if we were to understand these things, this would give mankind even greater potentials. So just as we've seen the transition of mankind just being limited to the Earth as an Earth-based species, transitioning to a level where we're now potentially wielding the principles of our solar system, including things like fusion reactions and related technologies, which are a consequence of understanding the principles governing our sun and our solar system. We can look to these higher frontiers of the galaxy, of the galactic system, as the even higher order process in the universe, which contains our solar system, which contains the Earth. And there's a lot that can be said on this, but one leading frontier that we've been pursuing in this galactic perspective is, as was mentioned, the issue of water. Water is supposedly a major crisis point today and in the coming generations. That places are running out of water. They're running out of water supplies. That they don't have the adequate water supplies needed to support their populations. In the United States, we see this in California, where we have a crazy degenerate running that state, Jerry Brown, who refuses to pursue the needed development of new water supplies, which are fully on the table and accessible, and instead believes that we should be reducing the population of California, lowering the living standards, and these crazy things. If you take this issue of water, we're now realizing that one of the major factors governing how water behaves in the atmosphere, in the atmospheric system, is the effects from our galaxy, so-called galactic cosmic radiation. That we've long realized that our Earth, even here on Earth, even here in the atmosphere, we're living in a galactic environment. We're being affected by the atmospheric characteristics of our galaxy, you could say. That our galaxy is completely permeated with high energy radiation. distributed throughout the entire galactic system. We exist within that context. It penetrates our solar system. It penetrates the Earth's magnetic field. It penetrates the Earth's atmosphere. And this effect from our galaxy, this thing we think is so far away and so much bigger than us, is actually at play constantly every day, every hour, every minute, every second on Earth. That things as basic as cloud formation, the formation of clouds, are a product of the activity of our galaxy interacting with our Earth's atmospheric systems. That the behavior of water, how water behaves in the atmosphere, when it falls as rain, when it condenses, when it doesn't, is affected and influenced by these galactic forces, by this high-energy galactic cosmic radiation shaping the characteristics of our own atmospheric system. And that we're already seeing on certain small levels, but in a sense still very significant, we're seeing that we can now use this understanding to manage these systems, to manage how water behaves in the atmosphere, to bring rain where we need rain, to inhibit rain where we don't want rain, to not just manage the water that's fallen on the land, but to manage how water behaves in the higher order system of the atmospheric component, which determines where the water is on land. That if we take this galactic perspective and look at mankind managing the global water system, the global water cycle, from the standpoint of his recognition of the higher order effect of the galaxy, this galactic system, we could be solving our water problems. There's not a finite amount of water on Earth. We're not running out of water. We're running out of adequate management and development of the cycle, of the cyclical characteristics of the water system. We're running into certain limitations by just pumping out groundwater, by just trying to divert rivers here or there. You know, those are things that need to be done. But if we're going to look at a higher order management of the system on an even higher level, we want to go to these atmospheric processes which bring the water to land, which govern the entire groundwater, surface water aspects of the water cycle. And we can do that. We can control these weather processes with these technologies premised on modulating and affecting these galactic effects on the atmosphere. It's been done. It's being done right now. It's been demonstrated. And it's the type of pursuit that really demonstrates that there are no limits to growth for mankind. There's no limits. The only limits that exist are those self-imposed by the failure to progress to the next level. You know, so I think you take the situation we're facing right now, and the fundamental issue I think we really need to bring to the table is, you know, not just removing this war threat by some practical, panicked response. I mean, we need to do that. Obama has to go. We have to take war off the table. But we have to replace it with this more fundamental shift in premising a new era of international relations on a scientific conception of mankind as a uniquely creative force that is different than the animals, that must always progress to exist, to fulfill its true existence and nature. That we have to move to a level where that is the fundamental law of international relations, of relations between nations, where we have a planet that, you know, has different nations, has different cultures, has different peoples which have their own cultural heritage, their own language cultures, their own languages. but is still unified in this subsuming universal pursuit of mankind's development of the planet from this standpoint, development of the solar system, and mankind's reaching towards the galaxy, this higher order galactic system, as pursuing the new frontiers, the new age for mankind, premised upon these higher levels. So I think we can really see the unity of this challenge in the current situation, with the current danger of self-annihilation, but recognizing that that danger doesn't come from progress. That danger comes from the lack of cultural and strategic progress premised on this higher order recognition of what mankind truly is as a creative force. So I'd be happy to take some questions, but I think that's what I want to put out there is the path that Mr. LaRouche has put on the table for our work with the scientific team with the basement in forcing the issue on these higher levels.
Hi, Ben. You're ready for questions? Are you ready for questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Does anybody, est-ce qu'il y a des gens qui ont des questions pour Ben? Je vais juste ouvrir la lumière un peu. Anybody? Come on up. All right. 1 second, Ben.
Hi. I'm happy that you talk about the improvement in food things because it's one of the thing I disagree the most with your movement because I got some information that the main for cereal, for example, we only ate cereal for the last 10,000 years. I think humanity has survived using that kind of food, but maybe it's not the best and the most useful food for our body. For example, we know that fruits and vegetables are better for nutrients and all. So will we do some studies on what is the best food we should produce? Not only saying that the density flux of the wheat is better, is more important in calories than an apple, but really figuring out what the impact on the body, what's that food create. Oh, and by the way, we also create foods now that has genetically modified with pesticide. That means that we cannot wash it away. So is it something that you approve of?
Yeah, I mean, as I discussed, we've already been genetically modifying food for thousands of years. You know, I think this is a very good example of exactly the real issue that we need to take up, because often the way this is presented is as if technology is the problem. You know, to genetically modify something, you know, people protest against GMOs, no genetically modified organisms. Well, why is that inherently bad? Why is it inherently bad to, you know, introduce rice that has been modified so it has certain nutrients that people are otherwise drastically lacking? You know, does that mean that it would be impossible to use such technologies for malicious ends? No, that can be done. You know, you have Monsanto, you have very bad organizations and people out there that certainly are going to try and exploit these types of things. But again, the response, it will not work just to say, well, we shouldn't have this technology. It will not work to say we just shouldn't have genetic modification of food supplies. You know, these are things that can be extremely beneficial and is just really, I think, the next natural step in what mankind's always been doing in terms of improving the biosphere, improving biological processes. The real issue, you raise food supplies, nutrition. You know, the real issue comes back to the depopulation agenda of the British Empire and of their lackeys like Obama, of people like Governor Jerry Brown, who's going along with their program. That's the issue we have to win the fight on. We're not going to win by banning this or that technology. We're going to win by rooting out the people that are still using, or attempting to use these technologies to pursue their deep-seated, degenerate oligarchical conceptions. You know, the British Empire has used food as a weapon for hundreds of years. They ran the famine in Ireland, killing millions of people. They ran many famines in India, killing tens, hundreds of millions of people through their reign in India. Throughout the 19th century into the 20th century. You know, they've intentionally used the famines, suppressing food supplies, not allowing food shipments to as a means of population control. And they've actively done it fully conscious, fully witting, fully intentionally to kill off people through mass starvation. It's horrific, horrific policies. Horrendous, but it's happened. They've done it multiple times. You know, and their legacy, their next generations, the people of the same belief, are currently out there today pursuing the same policy, you know, with the latest technologies, with the latest methods. You know, Prince Philip wants a world of 1 billion people. He's created an entire movement of collaborators on that effort. And they'll use food control, they'll use disease, they'll use other methods to do that. But the problem doesn't come from the technology. The problem doesn't come from whether or not we should be utilizing our ability to understand how things work to improve these processes for mankind's benefit. If we take that route, we're rejecting our nature as a creative species. You know, we can't you know, we need regulations, we need sane regulations. You know, these are types of things that, you know, obviously we need. You know, you need basic protections for, you know, these types of things. But the problem, you know, we have to identify clearly what the real problem is. And the real problem is that in the United States right now, speaking from the United States to you guys, we have a president that is a agent of this British imperial policy, this long expressed, very clearly stated, very clearly expressed and implemented policy of population reduction, population control, and this idea that they need to reduce the majority of the world population to a peasant-like class back to some type of oligarchical mode of existence, where you have a lower population overall run by a much even smaller section of an elite oligarchical class, where the majority of the people are kept in kind of a human cattle type mode of existence. That's the fight. That's what's on the table. It's the policy of Zeus, the Olympian Zeusian policy, expressed by people like Prince Philip, the Queen of England. You know, Jacques mentioned Julian Huxley. You know, another leading, you know, take the Huxley family, another leading case study and the example of this oligarchical mentality of the British Empire. You know, running from Julian Aldous Huxley, the brothers, up to their grandfather, Thomas Huxley. You know, major proponent of Darwin's ideas, pushing it towards the beginnings of what became the eugenics movement. So, you know, this is where the real fight is. It's eliminating the influence of these institutions, of these factions, and we have an amazing opportunity to do that right now. We have a new world system being created, led by Russia and China and their allies with the BRICS nations and the many nations that have allied with them, you know, in pursuit of something very simple: the freedom to develop and progress, and the freedom to collaborate in development and progress. Something that seems so simple, so human, so basic, but it's been denied to the world's population at an accelerating rate since the end of World War II, under the rise and reign of this transatlantic form of the British Empire. So that's what we have to eliminate, and that'll create the conditions in which, you know, we can address these types of issues. But that's the number one fight. If we want to have any effect, if we want to win these things, we're not going to win on smaller issues. We have to root out the source of the real deep evil, which is attempting to hold society back and threatening to blow up the entire world, frankly, in effect, if they don't get their way. Under the Obama right now with his hand on the button, threatening thermonuclear war against Russia and China.
Does anybody else have a question? Yes, coming up.
I have two questions. Regarding Obama, I agree with you regarding Obama that this administration is probably a worse administration than the Bush and Cheney administration, and Obama should be impeached just based on the fact that he's assassinated his own citizens and he's trampled all over the Constitution. But there's a continuity of government, and the vice president will take over, unless I'm missing something here. And Joe Biden, as far as I can tell, is just a loudmouthed idiot warmonger who will continue the same policy. And my second question is regarding the Pope and the Vatican. Do you think that a coup d'etat has taken place in the Vatican, if that's possible, with the appointment of a pagan and a Gaia worshipper as the head of the Academy of Sciences in the Vatican? This is an outrage as far as I'm concerned, and I'd just like your remarks on that.
Yeah, two very good questions. I mean, on the first one, yeah, you could say worse than Bush. I mean, I think, I think the clearest thing is it's a complete continuation of Bush's policies. And I think the most important thing is, you look at Obama as an individual, Barack Obama. You look at George W. Bush as an individual. This is not their policy. This is not. This doesn't come from those individuals. They're people that have been. They're people that have been put up there to read the speeches, to implement the policies. They're nasty people. They're malicious. They have certain evil streaks in them. But they're carrying forward and expressing a policy of this British policy and their allies on Wall Street. So it's really it's a total continuity from Bush to Obama. But I think the key is to not get sucked into mechanical or mathematical thinking, as Jacques was mentioning a little bit earlier in his address. You know, it's not just removing an individual. This would be, you got to think, how would that occur? What would actually happen? You know, would it just be someone would just put a resolution in, people would vote on it, and then he would step down as an individual, and someone else would step up? It doesn't work that way. If people started pushing to have Obama removed, either by impeachment or by the, you know, constitutional means which recognize that he is not mentally fit to remain in office because he's threatening to unleash the horrors of thermonuclear war completely unnecessarily in an aggressive action. You know, whatever means it were to occur, if people were to win that fight, it would be a win of it would be winning a political fight. It would not just be removing an individual. It would be a retaking of the control of the U.S. presidency. So it's not just one person goes, one person comes in. You know, this would be, the way it would happen would be in a process by which a new faction would move in and redirect the presidency of the United States. You know, whether or not, you know, whether or not Biden would be in there or whatever, I think would be a completely secondary issue. You know, it would be an effective retaking of the control of the nation by a different faction that wants a patriotic faction that recognizes the dangers, and there would be an entire new momentum moving in that direction created by that process. So, you know, I think that the key is to get away. This came up a lot with the Bush administration. The key is to get away from this type of mechanical thinking on it, and you know, you really are dealing with dynamic social processes, and it's not just one-to-one interactions. So, you know, we're not dealing with the other thing. We're not dealing with people that are just completely in control of every aspect of everything that happens. You know, these guys are not all powerful. You know, there are other factions at play. There's other elements in the United States institutions, in the presidency itself, in the Congress, you know, in other elements of the U.S. government. So it's not just a homogeneous control of this thing. So to think that, you know, just you pull that one guy out, the next one guy will come in, it doesn't quite work that way. And if we can get a process where you can marshal the political institutional forces to cause such a shift to occur and to carry out such a shift, that will put them in the position of carrying through what follows after that. And that's what we're fighting for. That's what has to happen. Regarding the situation in the Vatican, you know, I just admit I'm not enough of an expert on the history of the Vatican and the politics of what's going on there to, you know, say much in terms of specific details on exactly what's been at play. We can just point to what we know. We know that historically the Vatican has been ideologically opposed to these more radical Malthusian policies and ideas. And so, yeah, this was a big surprise. You could call it a coup. You know, I don't know how far it'll go. I don't know, you know, what the whole implications of everything involved in it have been and will be. But this is absolutely a dramatic change in direction. And, you know, as I said, and as we've covered, as Mr. LaRouche has really emphasized, you know, we've identified the key role of this guy, John Schellenhuber. And you look at the history of this guy. He was sent to try and strong-arm the Bush administration. He went over personally on behalf of the British, going together with one of Tony Blair's top advisors They went together to go to the United States, to go to the Bush administration. I think it was in 2004 or something like that, to try and force the Bush administration to go along with this whole climate change agenda. And the Bush administration actually issued a formal complaint to Tony Blair because they thought they were being treated so poorly by John Schellenhuber and by Blair's advisor. But then Schellenhuber went again to go meet with Obama when Obama became president, to get Obama to go along with the British policy on this climate change green agenda program. He was the, obviously he's a key advisor to Merkel. So he's got a whole history of being shipped around as a agent of influence to try and strong-arm, muscle, force these different institutions to go along with this climate change, really in effect depopulation program. So to see him in particular as the key advisor to the Pope, and some think, you know, a major author of large components of the encyclical, you know, tells a lot in terms of where the source of this shift came from. So in terms of the policy effect, yeah, it's definitely a coup. It's definitely a change in direction, a very negative, challenging change in direction. And I think a sign of the really desperate push that the British are of the British in trying to get this green climate change treaty in place in Paris this year. Because I think otherwise, I mean, the whole climate change issue is, you know, in my book, really falling apart. When you look at the science, you look at the debate that's coming out, these guys are increasingly desperate to try and maintain the facade of a consensus, of a total agreement, and trying to ram through this legally binding treaty as quickly as possible. Because I don't know how much longer this thing can hold up the way it's going. So, you know, I think this is all, you know, again, another very clear expression of how intense the situation is right now, you know, this year, the coming months, this month, in terms of a real convergence point of this entire shifting global situation.
Does anybody have another question here for BenDeniston?
I don't think my question was answered.
Okay, sure. A follow-up question?
Regarding the impeachment of Obama, Mr. LaRouche, he says how bad Obama is, and he waves his arms and he fulminates and calls Obama names, and you know, LaRouche thinks things through. Is he just dreaming that there's some faction waiting in the wings that will take over if Obama is impeached, and this faction will put America back on track again?
Well, I mean, he certainly has. I mean, just to declare very clearly up front, I'm certainly by no means qualified to have a full assessment on Mr. LaRouche's assessment of the institutions of the United States government. I mean, since his work in the early 70s, mid 70s, up through the present, he's been, you know, an active factor in the institution of the U.S. presidency. You know, maybe most explicitly up front and center around his relationship to Reagan, but you know, throughout these entire decades, he's been a component in the dialogue process in and around the U.S. presidency. And you know, I think another element of that, I think, you know, is it's not just that, you know, who talks to who. You know, you talk to important people, you get the right, you know, the good information from, you know, the high sources or something like that. You know, from I think it's also he has a sense of how these institutions work. He has a sense of what the factions are, what the different lines are, where the dividing lines are, who's on what issue. And, I think he's the one who's qualified more than anybody to have a clear assessment of what the real potentialities are for the United States in terms of what types of institutions and factions could come forward and carry through with a different direction. He has, I could just say a couple things very briefly. I mean, he's made no secret about pointing to the importance of Bill Clinton in particular, while, separating Bill Clinton from his wife, who has her own ambitions which blind her to certain higher realities. But, you look at Bill Clinton's role as president. This was the last president we had that made a serious effort to take on Wall Street and the international financial system. That's not a small task. That's not a small statement. That's not a little thing that he did. He really put his life on the line, quite frankly, coming out, calling for a new global financial architecture, making certain moves in terms of initiating discussions which could have led to that. So that's, an example of a recent president who, might not have been perfect on every issue, but was willing to take on the Wall Street global London financial system, which is, the exactly what runs Obama today. So, that's a clear example of the type of shifts that have been attempted, expressing certain intentions of certain factions in and around the presidency. You have O'Malley, who's very explicitly running his campaign on the recognition that Wall Street must be rooted out and we must have Glass-Steagall. You had, very recently, as we covered, as Jeff Steinberg and Megan Beats covered in our Friday webcast last night, you had a recent interview by the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is one of the many intelligence agencies in the United States. The agency tied to the Department of Defense. And the head of that agency had been doing good, solid, rigorous intelligence work, showing the fallacy of the Obama administration policy in the Middle East, in Syria, in the surrounding region. And for that, he was bounced out. He was fired. He was kicked out. And he just came out and gave an interview where he openly stated and put on the table, and he stuck his neck out, openly presenting to the public that he in fact knows that the Obama administration in fact knows and had intended that they're arming a radical Islamist fundamentalist movement, and that's what they're doing in the Middle East. This is a guy who is that we're not training moderates, that all this talk about, we're just looking for the moderate people that we're going to work with is a lie, and they know it's a lie. And they know they're funding extremists. They know they're supporting extremists, Al-Qaeda related linked groups. And the administration knows that's what they're doing. People like this, like this former Flynn, the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, they don't just come out and do that on their own, by themselves, just on a whim. I think that these are indications that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes and in the institutions of the U.S. government than you might see covered in the mainstream media, or maybe that'll ever come out publicly. Obviously another leading example has been the opposition from the military and the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff to Obama's military policy, led by General Dempsey, who's been while he's had to maintain his allegiance to the president, being a member of the armed forces and being serving under his commander-in-chief, Obama, has still been able to remain an effective war avoidance factor in stopping the war in Syria a couple of years ago, and in avoiding, attempting to avoid and pull back from what would be a catastrophic thermonuclear annihilation. So I mean, these are a few things that are just out there, but I think to see this, shows us there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. There's a lot more involved in the institutions of the U.S. government. And I think there are plenty of good, patriotic people who would be very happy to work in a sane administration with a sane orientation and a movement towards collaborating with other nations in moving in this other direction. And we know that just from just the work that we've done in Washington, D.C. And you meet these people who are the real people that run the government, the real people that implement the policies and write the policies. Despite the top-down consolidation of the presidency under this Obama administration, there are many people and factions in and around the U.S. government that, to varying degrees, hate what's happening and would absolutely be willing to go along with or are trying to push or fight for a different direction. So, but Mr. LaRouche's point most emphatically right now, within the last weeks, is his most emphatic point in this whole thing is that the worst thing people can do is try and predict where the outcome is going to happen. We don't know. It's an open fight right now. What's going to happen is going to be what people make happen, and that's the most important thing. People get stuck in this mindset of just there's some all-powerful people up there making decisions and you can't do anything about it. No, it's a fight. It's a political fight. We have to marshal the political forces in the population, in the institutions, to support the people to win this fight. It's an active, ongoing process that we're in the middle of. And that was, just within the last couple of weeks, as Mr. LaRouche first started to really warn about the imminent danger of this month of August. That was his refrain, that was his emphasis, that we have to not sit back and give commentary on what we think is going to happen, but we have to see ourselves as players in an active battle that's going on right now that can determine the outcome of global civilization. And that's how we have to think, and that's how we have to operate.
Okay, all right. We have one last question, or do you have a bit more time, Ben, for a last question, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. Anybody, or I have one. Yeah, okay. All right. I'm sorry I missed a bit of your presentation. I hope that's going to kind of fit with it. But, we discussed, Lynn has discussed this idea that science, the last real scientist was Einstein. And, there was this big attack coming from the Russell Bohr faction to try to destroy the science that Einstein, the faction that Einstein represented as the real scientific faction. There's this idea of entropy, which was introduced actually before, reworking the work of Sadi Carnot and saying that, we were basically going into death, and that was the principle of the universe, basically. It's a very sad destiny for everybody. And then there was this uncertainty principle, which was brought up by the Copenhagen interpretation and the quantum physics that we know today. But this is, at the same time as they're saying that it's chaos and it's always going to be chaos, they're trying to implement laws to say that we're going to do it one way and nothing else can be permitted. It seems to be very contradictory with the way that the universe seems to. They want to dictate it. They want to tell people how to do it, and they say the universe is chaotic. To me, it's very contradictory. And I wanted to ask you a question to comment on this. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it goes to the I think what Mr. LaRouche understands is the unification of the process we're in the middle of right now. He's in referencing Einstein as the last great American. He said sometimes scientist of the 20th century, the only one really. Is highlighting this process of degeneration in science, but also in culture, in art, and in general thinking and outlook, especially in the United States, in the transatlantic region, over the past century. And I think to address what you're raising here, I think the most important issue is the attempt to destroy the conception or the understanding of human creativity. That, I think, comes out as an invariant expressed consistently in this process. You look at what Russell was doing, you look at other adherents to this radical mathematical outlook, the attempt to completely rewrite science as simply mathematics, this hardcore reductionist outlook, that there's this attempt to paint science as this purely mathematical, descriptive process. And then, based on that, you then invert it and say, well, then science tells us what the world is, and this is what the world is. And what is eliminated is any recognition of actual what the human mind actually does. The human mind doesn't operate by mathematics. The human mind doesn't operate by logical deduction. That's not what makes the human mind unique. That's not what enables the human mind to make something which we call discovery, fundamental, revolutionary scientific discovery. And if you look at the history of science and the fight over this issue in the history of science, you get a much clearer understanding of the real evil nature of what's happened in the past century. Because you look at the Renaissance, you look at some of the greatest scientific thinkers, scientific revolutions, and you look at Kepler's work. You look at the relation between Nicholas of Cusa, one of the founders and leaders of the Renaissance, the Golden Renaissance. You look at his relation to Kepler later, who continued the work and the ideas of Cusa. They recognized very clearly and explicitly that their scientific revolution was based on a recognition of a fundamental principle of human creativity. That there's something about how the human mind works, which is not mathematical, it's not biological, it's not deductive, that enables mankind to come to a higher order relationship with the fundamental ordering principles of the universe, so to speak. The way that happens is not what is described as science today. It's not making precise measurements, creating a logical system, and then extrapolating the logical results from those measurements. It doesn't come from that. It doesn't come from interpretations of sense perception. It comes from something unique that the human mind can do, a certain process of discovery, irony, metaphor, creation of something which didn't exist before, which didn't come from the logical implications of the predicates, but was generated anew as something independent and created in and of itself. That the human mind has a certain capability to do that, to make actual discoveries, not deductions, not extrapolations, but fundamental discoveries. that has been rooted out, attacked, destroyed, and basically eliminated from our conception of science. And what's presented as science today, and what's presented as also art, culture, really tries to destroy or root out or suppress any discussion or recognition of the unique creative powers of the human mind per se. And so you look at what's happened in science, I think that gets right at the root of it. That on the one side, we recognize that that is the capability that enables mankind to have scientific progress, to develop, to change his relationship to the universe. Not from sense perception, not from mathematics, not from deduction, but from human creativity alone. Then you can invert that and say, well, what does that tell us about the nature of the universe? We don't have the whole answer. We don't know everything. But what does that tell us about the nature of the universe? That the thing, the process that allows mankind to come into a higher order coherence, a more fundamental relation at a higher level with the organizing principles underlying the physical universe as we experience it, is specifically only something unique about the human mind's creative potential. That our understanding of the universe, our recognition of how the universe operates, is fundamentally tied to the fact that it is specifically human creativity that is what the universe is responsive to. That is what allows us to come into a higher order understanding of how the universe operates. This is something that Cusa certainly understood in his founding of modern science, in his work intimately tied to the development of the Renaissance. And this is the conception that absolutely needs to return today if we're going to move society forward. Because if we don't have this recognition of what we are as a species and what is this capability of human creative action which makes us unique, then we're not going to be able to move forward and address the challenges before us today. So again, I think this is what's so important about this organization, this movement, the Schiller Institute, the work of the LaRouches, is that we're not just trying, we cannot succeed by simply removing certain negative elements. But we also must create new, truthful, and more truthful conceptions about what mankind actually is. And we must organize society and leaders of society around these higher order conceptions. And that's politics. That's progress. That's something that makes your life mean something. Because that's creation. That's creating something new. And that's why I think it's so important we hold these events That's why these series of conferences that Mrs. LaRouche has organized as international conferences on the subject of creating this new paradigm are so absolutely historically important and crucial right at this current moment right now.
Well, thank you very much, Ben, for this discussion we had today. Yeah, everybody is thanking you here. I'm pretty sure. Thank you very much. Hopefully, we'll be able to do that again.
Sure, gladly.
All right, take care. Maintenant, on va passer au deuxième volet de la conférence. On va passer à BenDeniston, qui est membre de l'équipe scientifique du Larouche PAC. Pour la traduction, si vous avez besoin de traduction en français, c'est toujours le même numéro, le bon numéro maintenant qu'on a, donc juste appeler avec votre téléphone, si besoin est. Sinon, c'est ça. Ben va parler en anglais. Donc, on est en train de... On a de la liaison. Is it connected at all? Yeah. OK. Ce ne sera pas très long. Ah, le voici. D'accord. Here he is. So Ben, whenever you are ready.
Okay. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Je vais couper la lumière.
So I'm a member of Lyndon LaRouche's scientific research team, sometimes referred to as the basement team. And I was asked to talk today a little bit about the work we're doing, the work that Lyndon LaRouche has had us doing on the issue of understanding the significance of our galaxy, of the Milky Way galactic system that we're a part of. And this is kind of a frontier area of research that we've been pursuing under Mr. LaRouche's direction. But to get into it, I want to just emphasize the way we're approaching it. The importance of this issue is not an abstract academic scientific study. It's a pursuit of the next scientific level for mankind as a unique species on this planet. You know, the issue is not simply the galaxy as some abstract object, but what the galaxy means, what the principle of our galactic system means for mankind. Not as some isolated object, but what does it mean for mankind, and what is it then, and what does that process then tell us about the nature of mankind as a unique force on this planet, in this solar system, and beyond? And that's what we've been working on with our scientific work with Mr. LaRouche. That's what I wanted to discuss a little bit today. I want to situate it within the context of this threat of thermonuclear war that we've been discussing, that was referenced earlier by Jacques in his opening remarks, that we are literally sitting on the verge of thermonuclear annihilation. If we let Obama go to war with Russia, with China, utilizing thermonuclear weapons, we can see the extinction of modern civilization. And I want to just take a minute and look at that fact, because I think it's a very significant point to be brought out in that reality, on the one side, in the horrors of the potential we see in the hands of Obama with the threat of nuclear war. And I just wanted to take a minute and look at what we're talking about when we talk about the power of thermonuclear weapons. I'm not sure how familiar people are with thermonuclear explosives, but you often measure the size of a nuclear explosive or a thermonuclear explosive in maybe kilotons or megatons. Now, what does that mean? Kilotons references thousands of tons of TNT equivalent. So TNT is a standard explosive that we're familiar with. If we want to measure the energy released from a nuclear bomb, a nuclear explosive device, oftentimes it's compared to the equivalent amount of TNT which would be required to release the same amount of energy as one nuclear explosive. So these are often measured in terms of kilotons, which kilo meaning thousand, thousands of tons, or if not kilotons, megatons, millions of tons of weight of TNT to match the energy release of a single thermonuclear explosive device. One megaton device, and that's by no means the largest thermonuclear explosive or weapon that's been developed or is capable of being deployed, but just to take a reference point, 1 megaton device releases the same amount of energy as 1 million tons of TNT. To visualize how much TNT that is, that's enough TNT explosive material to fill 2 entire oil supertankers. And if you've seen how large an oil supertanker is, you have an idea of what I'm talking about. So just to kind of take a second to stretch or to expand our imagination a little bit, the equivalent of 2 entire oil supertankers filled with TNT, that much energy can be released in one single thermonuclear explosive device. And that's not all devices are of that size, but that's just to give a range and a conception of how much energy can be released by one of these devices. You know, we're talking one device can devastate an entire city. Now, the United States and Russia each have something on the order of 10,000 of these devices. The United States has submarines. We've covered in particular the Ohio-class submarines of the United States military forces, where each submarine can have up to 24 missiles, and each missile can have 4 to 8 individual warheads, which can be targeted at different targets. So any one U.S. submarine can release something on the order of 100 to 200 warheads coming out of something around the range of potentially 24 missiles. So we live in a pretty wild, frightening situation where one submarine out of 14 of this class that are known about can release something in the order of 1 to 200 devices, warheads, each significantly, 1 or 2 orders of magnitude, or 10 or 20 times more powerful than the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, this is an incredible, frightening capability that exists. One submarine can potentially wipe out well over 100 cities with one series of launches of their missiles. And we have 14 of these submarines. And then we have the capabilities of the Air Force, of our bombers. And as Jacques referenced, some of these new fighter jets outfitted with new nuclear bombs that extend the range and the speed at which these can be deployed. We have, ground-based launch missiles, silos. So it is a capability, as Jacques referenced back to the time of Kennedy. It's been recognized and increasingly recognized by sane people that this is a new form of warfare. This is a new form of conflict. This is a different game, a different stage, a different age that mankind has entered within the past, 50 to 80 years. And right now, that capability is in the hands of Obama. So, just to re-reference what we've discussed, Obama is not mentally fit to be in the presidency of the United States, and LaRouche is leading the effort to have him removed from office because he is pursuing a military aggression policy directed at China and Russia, backed up by this thermonuclear annihilation capability. But let's think about this reality that warfare has now reached the point where we can destroy ourselves as a species. That has not been the case before. We've had world wars. We've had the collapse of empires. We've had conflicts. None of that has had the ability to self-annihilate the entire human species. Now that potentiality exists. So this is a unique, although we've been in this point for decades now, it's still a new situation. It's still a new reality that global society has not come to really address in a sane way. Something has to change. We can no longer afford the potential, even the slightest chance, for this type of conflict to break out, because the consequences are beyond anything that we could even imagine. But right now we're again, after having gone through the Cuban Missile Crisis, after having gone through the Cold War, the high points in the Cold War in the 80s, having gone through these developments, having gone through cases where just a glitch in a computer system has almost triggered launches. That has happened before. Having gone through these periods, we're again at a point where we do have the real life potential for a frankly mentally unfit person in office, Barack Obama, pursuing a geopolitical policy, pursuing the types of policies that have, plagued the world in the past centuries, of this imperial domination, geopolitical domination. A new form of that same mode of action is now again bringing us to the point where the reality is on the table that we could actually eliminate ourselves as a species. So something has to change. Now, there's been movements in the United States and other places that take the approach of saying, well, we need to just get rid of nuclear technology. We need to eliminate nuclear weapons. Well, that might not be a bad thing if we could actually somehow get to the point where we don't have massive stockpiles and, launch-ready nuclear weapons sitting there on cue pointed at each other. That would be good. But that wouldn't, prevent some other nation or some other force at some point in the future from developing that technology again, developing the capabilities again. So some people say we should just eliminate this technology. We should just not have anything to do with nuclear at all. Some people go completely over the top and say we should just get rid of all things nuclear, not even, pretend we never even discovered this this power, this capability of nuclear reactions, which can unleash such devastation. but that is a fallacious, some just frankly idiotic view, because you can't undo technological progress. You can't undo scientific discoveries. You can't take mankind backwards. You can't reverse mankind's development, and you can't hold mankind back at any one given level. So I think, looking at this looking at the current war danger from that standpoint, I think puts a rather interesting and important perspective on what challenges we are facing right now. We being, mankind as a whole, and we being, in particular, people who are stepping up to take leadership to move society forward and to address these particular challenges. We're at a point where something does have to change. We can't somehow create a world where mankind no longer knows about E = mc squared and the potential for releasing the energy density capabilities in the atomic nucleus. We're in that world now. You can't take that back. But what we're discussing here, what Lyndon LaRouche has put on the table, what he's been fighting for decades, what Helga Zepp LaRouche has been fighting for decades, what Helga Zepp LaRouche has more recently put on the table as an explicit call for the end of the age of geopolitics. We are looking at the need to make a change, not in eliminating some technology, but in moving the global cultural system to a new level, to a new stage. And this is not, think about the threat we're facing right now. This is not some, fantasy, fantastic vision where, we just want to, everybody's going to get along and everything's going to be perfect, and this is not just some fantasy. This is a necessity now. Mankind has reached the point where we have to move to a new level of understanding of what the true nature of the human species is, as a uniquely creative force different than any animal species that's reached a level of development, of progress, where if we continue to follow these old paradigms, to allow these types of geopolitical or imperial or oligarchical modes of activity continue, that we're threatening to wipe ourselves out. So the idea of moving to a new age beyond general warfare, where nations actually cooperate in common aims, in common progress, in common development. We actually find ground that we all share. Americans, Canadians, Europeans, the Chinese, Russians, find grounds that we all share as human beings that we can collaborate on in common pursuits